That afternoon, while checking his animal traps along the stream, Caleb suddenly came to a halt. Amid the white of the frost and snow, three bodies lay sprawled beside the water. Their limbs curled in as if lifeless. His heart tightened. He rushed over, dropped to his knees, and then heard a faint breath from one of them. "Oh Lord, they are still alive," he murmured, his hands trembling as they touched the ice-cold skin. "Hold on. I will not let you die here." Without a moment's hesitation, Caleb bent down and hoisted each body onto his shoulders, staggering through the deep snow that reached up to his knees. Every step felt like a blade cutting into his tired chest. But he pressed on, not out of duty, but because something long dormant in his heart was beginning to awaken. As night fell, the cabin glowed with firelight. The three Apache women, their skin bronzed like copper, their bodies strong yet now drained of all strength, lay curled up by the fireplace. Caleb covered them with blankets and whispered, as if to himself, "You are safe now. No one has to die in this cold ever again." And in that moment, he knew this winter would be unlike any winter he had ever known. On that first night after the rescue, the fire in the cabin crackled and danced like it had not done in many years. Caleb sat beside the fireplace, watching the three Apache women curled up beneath thick blankets. Their skin was bluish, their lips cracked, and their breathing faint but still there, flickering like embers that refused to die. He poured more warm water into a wooden bowl and gently touched the shoulder of the one lying closest. She slowly opened her eyes, her gaze lost and tinged with fear. "You are awake," Caleb said softly, his voice deep and low like wind against wooden walls. "Drink a little water. It will help." She hesitated, then took a small sip. The warmth spread down her throat, and a tear rolled down her sun-darkened cheek. Caleb asked nothing more. He knew that right now, what they needed most was not words but a sense of safety. That entire night, he did not sleep. From time to time, one of the women would wake, her eyes filled with wariness. Once, the tallest of the three managed to whisper a few words in broken English. "Why? Help us." Caleb paused, mid-motion as he tucked another blanket around her, and met her eyes. Then he said quietly, "Because no one deserves to die alone in the snow." In the days that followed, the tiny cabin slowly turned into a place of life. Caleb kept the fire burning longer, cooking simple soups from dried meat and potatoes. The three women, now able to sit up and speak a few words, began to help with light chores, like stacking firewood or tidying up the room. The distance between them gradually faded. One evening, as the wind howled fiercely outside, Caleb glanced at the three women sitting by the fire, sharing a piece of cornbread he had just baked. No one spoke, but their eyes were different now, no longer filled with fear or suspicion. The tall woman, the one he would later learn was named Nayeli, spoke softly, her voice still trembling. "We owe you our lives." Caleb shook his head and gave a small smile. "No. You just need to live, and find a reason to keep going." Outside, the snowstorm still raged. But inside the wooden cabin, something had changed. It was no longer just about surviving, clinging to life in the face of death. It was about warmth, about trust, slowly igniting in hearts once thought forever frozen. 2 days had passed since Caleb brought the three Apache women back to the cabin. The blizzard outside still howled without rest, but inside the small house, the fire burned warmer with each passing hour. Their bodies were slowly recovering, color had returned to their cheeks, and faint footsteps had begun to echo across the wooden floor. But deep inside, the wounds that could not be seen had never truly begun to heal. One evening, after a simple meal of dried meat and potatoes, silence settled over the room. The eldest sister, Nayeli, set her spoon down and stared into the flickering flames. "Do you know why we were out there?" she asked, her voice raspy, as if filled with sand. Caleb paused his dishwashing and gently shook his head. "I do not need to know, unless you want to tell me." Nayeli took a deep breath, as though dragging each memory up from a dark abyss. "We were taken from a traveling group. They beat us, tied us up, and tried to sell us like animals." Siala, the fiery one, looked up with eyes burning from rage long suppressed. "They laughed and said our muscles would fetch a better price on the market. They even placed bets on which one of us would collapse first. The youngest, Taya, said nothing. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clung tightly to her sister's hand. We escaped on a rainy night, ran for miles, until we collapsed by the stream where you found us. Caleb sat in stunned silence. In the flickering firelight, he saw more than just 3 survivors. He saw 3 souls carrying wounds that the world had no right to inflict. No one deserves to be treated like that, he said softly. And no one is going to lay a hand on you again, not while I am here. Those words, simple as they were, shifted something in the air. They were no longer just strangers seeking shelter from a snowstorm. They were people beginning to trust each other, even if only a little. That night, for the first time since Caleb had been living alone, 3 others slept peacefully under his roof. And in their restless dreams, he heard whispers in Apache, not words of fear, but prayers for a new beginning. The final snowstorm eventually passed, leaving behind a silent forest blanketed in white frost. Inside the small cabin, it seemed like a new chapter of peace had begun for Caleb and the 3 Apache women. They tended the fire, mended clothes, cleaned the horse stalls, and for the first time in years, soft laughter returned to a place that had once known only silence. But peace, out in the west, never lasted long. That afternoon, while splitting wood at the timber pile, Caleb noticed something unusual. Horse tracks. Not his, not theirs. The prints were fresh, deep, and clear. At least 4 or 5 horses had passed through the area. His chest tightened. They have found the trail, Caleb muttered. That evening, a heavy tension settled over the cabin. Nayeli saw the change in Caleb's eyes. What is it? She asked, her voice low. Someone has come, he replied, gripping the Winchester rifle on the table. And I do not think they are the good kind. The next morning, his fears came true. In the distance, 4 riders appeared along the ridge, moving slowly, like wolves stalking prey. When they were a few hundred yards from the cabin, they stopped. One of them, tall, thin, draped in a dusty long coat, shouted in a harsh, grating voice, "We know you're hiding those 3 squaws in there. Hand them over. And maybe you get to keep that pretty little life of yours." Rancher. Inside the cabin, no one said a word. Caleb stood in front of the door, his hand resting on the rifle's grip. The 3 women held their breath, their eyes shadowed by the familiar fear that had haunted them. "You listen to me," Caleb called back, his voice calm but hard as steel. "They are not going anywhere. If you want in, you will have to step over my dead body." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then came a low, cruel laugh. "Fine. We got all the time in the world." They did not attack right away. Instead, they disappeared into the woods, but from that point on, watchful eyes lingered around the cabin every time night fell. The feeling of being hunted kept all 4 of them from sleep. The women offered to leave. They did not want Caleb to get caught in the crossfire. But he stood firm. "If you step out of here, they will kill you," he said. "If you stay, they will have to go through me." The 3 looked at him, then fell silent. That night, as the fire crackled, Caleb cleaned his rifle and murmured, "The snowstorm has passed, but what's coming is much colder." And he knew the time for hiding was over. A confrontation was inevitable. I am grateful to have you here. If this story stirred something in you, memories of dusty afternoons, of hoofbeats echoing in your chest, then subscribe to my channel, so each day we can sit together again. And I will tell you another story from the West. In the days that followed, the silence in the forest was no longer peaceful, it was a warning. Caleb knew the traffickers were waiting for the right moment. At dawn, as pale sunlight crept across the hillside, Caleb gathered every last round of ammunition and laid it on the wooden table. The Winchester was cleaned down to the smallest detail, and the short-barreled Colt never left arm's reach. He taught Nayeli, Ciala, and Taya how to handle firearms, how to set traps around the cabin, and how to take cover behind the stone barrier. Steady your breath, aim slightly lower than the target, and do not let your hand shake, Caleb instructed as Ciala pulled the trigger. The bullet striking clean through a log 20 meters away, or about 65 feet. She looked at him, nodding with eyes no longer filled with fear. "Aren't we going to run?" Taya asked softly, her voice barely louder than the wind. "No," Caleb answered firmly. "If we run, they will chase us to the ends of the earth. Here, we have land, we have fire, and we will fight together. During those days of preparation, the cabin turned into a fortress. They built extra barricades, stacked stones on the roof to block bullets, and dug a small trench behind the house as an escape route in case the worst came to pass. At night, Caleb patrolled the area, clearly hearing horses in the distance. A warning whispered through the trees. And yet, amid all the tension, strange, quiet moments would slip in. One evening, as Caleb was fastening extra shutters, Nayeli stepped forward and took his hand. "We have never fought for ourselves before," she said softly. "But this time, we will fight for you." Caleb met her dark eyes filled with pain, with gratitude, and something more. "Not for me," he said, "for your freedom, for everything they stole from you." The day of reckoning drew closer. Wind from the east carried the scent of smoke and the distant sound of hooves, now louder and clearer. The hunters were no longer hiding. They came in small groups, scouting around the cabin, then vanished into the trees like ghosts. When night fell on the 7th day, Caleb sat by the fireplace, his rifle resting in his hands. No one spoke. The 3 women sat quietly around the table, the firelight reflecting on their faces, the faces of those who had once been victims, now ready to become warriors. "Tomorrow," Caleb said softly, breaking the silence, "it will all end. One way or another." Outside, the night was frighteningly still, but inside that cabin, 4 people were ready for the battle that would decide all of their fates. That morning, dawn brought no light, only a leaden-gray sky, heavy and bitterly cold. Caleb had been awake long before the first rooster crowed, checking each bullet, tightening every screw on his Winchester. The 3 Apache women were ready too. No longer panicked survivors now, they stood as true warriors, shoulder to shoulder with the man who had pulled them from a fateful snowstorm. The sound of hooves echoed from deep within the forest, heavy and rhythmic like war drums. Then suddenly, the sky lit up with fire. The traffickers had returned. 6 of them burst out from the pine trees, rifles in hand, unleashing a hail of bullets toward the cabin. "Positions!" Caleb shouted, throwing open the window and aiming his rifle. In the attic, Nayeli and Taya lay flat, delivering precise shots from a distance. On the ground floor, Ciala reloaded rounds for Caleb, her eyes burning with fury. "They are not taking anything back," Ciala roared, pulling the trigger, her bullet slamming into the shoulder of one man and knocking him clean off his horse. The battle raged for hours. Bullets tore through the frigid air, slamming into tree trunks, splintering the wooden walls of the cabin. Gun smoke mixed with the white breath of winter, creating a battlefield as brutal as any war. Every reload sent their hearts pounding in their chests, but none of them backed down. One man charged the door, shouting in rage, "Give us the squaws, cowboy. They do not belong to this world." Caleb tightened his grip and answered with a cold, deadly shot. "And this world does not belong to men like you." As the sun began to dip behind the trees, the gunfire finally died down. 2 of them lay dead in the snow. One was gravely wounded and collapsed beneath a pine. The last, the leader, the one behind countless kidnappings, had been taken down and tied up by Nayeli right on the cabin's front porch. The white snow was now stained with red. The trees around the house were riddled with bullet holes, the windows shattered, the roof riddled with damage. But this small patch of land still stood not just because of bullets, but because of the unshakable will of 4 people who once had nothing left to lose. Caleb stood in the blood-stained snow, breath heavy, hands still trembling with adrenaline. He looked at the 3 women. They were bruised and battered, but their eyes blazed brighter than ever. "We held it," he said hoarsely. "Not just the cabin, but our freedom." Amid the wreckage and spilled blood, something new had been born, the belief that they were no longer victims, but the protectors of their own lives. The snow had stopped by the next morning, but the ground was still stained red from the battle the night before. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air, mingling with the cold, metallic scent of blood. Caleb's cabin was now little more than a wreck of shattered timber and bullet-ridden walls. Yet in the midst of all the ruin, something still flickered, the belief that they had survived, and more than that, they had defended their freedom. The leader of the traffickers lay slumped against the wall, his hands tightly bound behind his back with rope. His eyes were full of hatred, but somewhere beneath it, fear had begun to surface. Nayeli stepped forward, gun trembling in her grip, her fury barely contained. "One shot," she growled. "Just one, and he will never hurt anyone again." Caleb stood in silence for a long moment, looking at the man who had once treated human lives like merchandise. Then he gently placed his hand on Nayeli's rifle, slowly lowering it. "Not like this," he said quietly. "Justice is not revenge driven by rage." Ciala frowned. "You're going to let the law handle him, after everything he's done?" "Yes," Caleb replied firmly, "because if we kill him, we are no different than he is. But if he stands trial, if he is judged and condemned, then that is the victory of what is right, not of hatred." His words left all three women silent. Their anger did not vanish, but for the first time in years, they saw another path, one that did not demand the cost of their souls. That afternoon, Caleb flagged down a passing territorial patrol wagon as it made its way through the valley. With the help of the three women, he handed over the surviving traffickers to the law. The sheriff looked them over, then turned to Caleb and gave a slow, approving nod. "You did the right thing, Ross. Not many out here in the West still believe in justice." As the wagon rolled away, carrying the traffickers out of sight, Taya stood on the porch, eyes following it until the last wheel vanished into the distance. A single tear slipped down her cheek, falling onto the dry snow below. "For the first time," she whispered, "for the first time, I believe this world might still have fairness." Caleb gently squeezed her hand. "Justice may be slow," he said, "but if we hold on to it, it always comes." That night, for the first time in years, the four of them sat around the fire, not in fear, but in faith. They had not just survived the storm and the bullets, they had chosen to stand in the light. And by doing so, they had reclaimed a part of their humanity that had once been taken from them. In the soft stillness of the Wyoming night, the fire burned warmer than ever. Not because the cabin was still standing, but because their hearts, after all the pain, had finally found the path toward justice and hope. Winter eventually gave way to the gentle light of spring. The thick sheets of ice that once covered the stream began to melt, revealing water trickling between roots and smooth stones. The field in front of the cabin, once stained red with blood and ash, now showed the first signs of green. It was as if the land itself had taken a deep breath. And in that breath, the four people once bound together by fear now stood side by side for something greater. Hope. The three Apache women could finally step outside without glancing over their shoulders. Nayeli planted corn seeds by the porch, her hands once tight around a blade, now gently pressing new life into the soil. Ciala repaired the wooden fence around the horse corral, a task meant for strong men. Yet to her, it felt like play. Taya led the sheep to pasture, her bright laughter echoing through the valley, a sound Caleb had almost forgotten after all these years. One afternoon, as golden sunlight spilled across the valley, Nayeli approached Caleb while he was fixing the stable door damaged in the fight. "We've talked," she said softly, her gaze warm. "None of us want to leave. This is our home." Caleb looked up at the three women standing together, their long black hair dancing in the spring breeze. A strange feeling rose in his chest, something he thought he had lost with his wife and son many years ago. Then, "This will be home for all of us," he said, his lips curling into a rare smile. Day by day, the once lonely cabin became a true home. Every morning, Caleb and Ciala took the livestock to graze. In the evenings, Taya lit the fire for dinner, while Nayeli sat on the porch reading aloud the English words Caleb had taught her. At night, the four of them gathered around the fireplace, sharing stories from the past and dreams of the future. No longer were their wounds bleeding now. Their memories were slowly stitching themselves back together, bound by trust and newfound kinship. Caleb, who once believed his life had ended in that bitter winter, now looked ahead with a heart lighter than ever. The three women once imprisoned, beaten, and cast aside were no longer victims. They were his family, and the place that once echoed only with wind through broken windows now rang with laughter, with roosters crowing, and with plans for a new season. Spring had returned life to this land, and to the hearts of those who once believed they could never love again. In the little cabin by the stream, a true home had been reborn. My friends, there are people who seek neither fame nor glory, only a heart that loves, and a will that never wavers. When darkness comes, they rise not for themselves, but for those they love. They know that protecting a single heart is worth more than 1,000 victories, and that quiet kindness, simple, unconditional, is what creates the truest kind of justice. It means the world to have you here with me. I truly hope that wherever you are safe, happy, and at peace. I love you, my cherished audience of Wild West storytelling. Tell me what you thought of this story. Leave a comment below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed it. And do not forget to subscribe for more dramatic stories from the Wild West.